Weakness is not something people wait to observe through your failure. It is detected long before any visible collapse occurs. The human mind is built to scan for advantage, to measure resistance, and to calculate how much pressure another person can tolerate before bending. This assessment happens silently, instinctively, and without moral consideration. People do not ask whether you are good or bad, deserving or undeserving. They ask a far simpler question: how costly would it be to crush you? Before words are exchanged, signals are already transmitted. The body speaks first. The way you enter a room, the way your shoulders carry weight, the way your eyes meet or avoid another's gaze, all deliver information. Hesitation is read as uncertainty. Uncertainty is vulnerability. A voice that trails off at the end of sentences communicates an unspoken request for permission. Even excessive friendliness functions as a confession of psychological need. These cues accumulate rapidly, forming an internal verdict about your position in the social order. What makes this process cruel is that it is not conscious. People do not sit and plan to disrespect you. They simply respond to the information you give them. When resistance appears absent, pressure naturally increases. Just as water flows toward the lowest point, human behavior moves toward the path of least opposition. Where there is no boundary, intrusion feels justified. Where there is no consequence, domination feels safe. Weakness is therefore sensed as a prediction, not as an event. Others imagine how you would respond under stress, disagreement, or confrontation. If your past behavior suggests avoidance, appeasement, or self-doubt, the future is already written in their mind. You are categorized as someone who will explain rather than enforce, endure rather than confront, tolerate rather than withdraw. This categorization becomes a silent license for disrespect. The tragedy is that many people unknowingly train others to treat them poorly. Each time you suppress irritation to maintain harmony, each time you accept discomfort to avoid tension, you reinforce an image of pliability. Over time, this image hardens. You are no longer perceived as patient or kind, but as absorbent. Someone who will carry emotional weight without protest becomes useful, and usefulness is rarely respected. Psychological strength is not loud, and it is not aggressive. It is felt in the certainty of limits. When a person knows where they stand, their behavior carries a quiet finality. They do not negotiate their dignity. They do not rush to be understood. They do not fill silence to soothe others. This composure unsettles those who rely on dominance because it offers no obvious handle to grip. Fear plays a central role in this dynamic, though it is rarely acknowledged. People fear resistance because resistance introduces risk. It threatens comfort, stability, and self-image. When they sense that you are willing to disrupt the flow, to withdraw cooperation, or to create friction, they instinctively adjust. Respect emerges not from admiration, but from caution. It is the byproduct of knowing that pushing further may carry a cost. Those who are consistently disrespected often misunderstand the cause. They believe they must prove their value, display their competence, or demonstrate their goodness. But value does not prevent disrespect. Capability does not shield against it. Only the perception of self-possession does. The moment you seek validation, you signal dependency, and dependency invites control. There is a subtle power in being difficult to move. Not stubborn, not aggressive, but internally anchored. When your reactions are measured rather than emotional, when your responses are selective rather than automatic, people struggle to read you. This unreadability forces restraint. They hesitate, not knowing where the line lies. In that hesitation, respect is born. Weakness is sensed when your presence feels negotiable. When others believe they can take your time, energy, or attention without consequence. Strength is sensed when your presence feels conditional. When access to you is earned, not assumed. This is why those who tolerate less are paradoxically given more. Their limits create value. The world does not punish weakness out of malice. It simply reorganizes itself around it. People lean where there is space to lean. push where there is room to push, and dominate where there is no resistance. Understanding this is not an invitation to cruelty, but to clarity. The refusal to recognize this mechanism leaves one permanently confused, wondering why kindness is met with disregard and patience with contempt. To be respected, one must first be internally immovable, not rigid, but rooted. When your sense of self is not open to negotiation, it radiates outward. Others feel it before they can name it. They sense that crossing you would require effort, that diminishing you would not be easy, that extracting compliance would come at a price. This perception forms instantly, often within seconds, long before any overt conflict arises, long before any boundary is tested, and long before weakness is ever shown. Human behavior is far more predictable than most admit, yet it is the subtleties that reveal the deepest truths. Disrespect does not erupt from a single insult or a deliberate act of malice. It begins in the invisible spaces, in the small concessions and unguarded moments that signal tolerance. It starts with gestures that appear insignificant, with reactions that seem harmless. These micro-permissions, tiny allowances for intrusion, gradually build a framework in the observer's mind, quietly instructing them on the boundaries they may cross without consequence. Each laugh at a cutting remark, each nod of agreement to an opinion that undermines you, each quick surrender to demands or expectations tells a silent world that your limits are flexible, that your presence can be adjusted to accommodate the desires of others. These acts are often so subtle that they escape conscious notice, yet they accumulate into a clear psychological signal. The mind of another measures more than words. It measures patterns, timing, and emotional cost. When you answer immediately every time someone calls, when you explain or justify every decision before it is even questioned, you inadvertently communicate an urgent need for validation. Each attempt to smooth interactions or prevent discomfort conveys an unconscious admission. Your value depends on others' approval. This creates a fertile ground for exploitation. People do not necessarily intend to take advantage consciously. They respond to the unspoken message. The cost of pushing boundaries is negligible. Respect is rarely requested. It is assumed when it is earned, often silently, by maintaining a psychological cost for intrusion. When that cost is low, exploitation becomes natural, almost inevitable. There is a peculiar cruelty in this dynamic, yet it is entirely natural. The human mind seeks efficiency. It follows the path of least resistance. If someone consistently allows themselves to be bargained with, persuaded, or interrupted, the mind quickly internalizes this pattern and begins to act on it automatically. Disrespect does not require conscious malice. It is a rational response to the environment you create with your own behavior. What you tolerate in small increments signals more than what you protest against openly. Each concession, each overextension of patience, each willingness to absorb the discomfort of others quietly informs them that crossing your psychological boundaries carries little risk. This is why people who are endlessly polite, constantly available, or overly accommodating often experience repeated dismissals and interruptions. They have trained their world to behave predictably, and predictability invites domination. Disrespect thrives on predictability. The human mind seeks patterns and acts upon them without reflection. When your reactions are uniform, when your behavior anticipates the desires of others without asserting your own, people unconsciously interpret your predictability as malleability. The signals you give are more important than the words you speak. A hesitation before asserting yourself, a smile that deflects tension, or the habit of explaining every action can be more revealing of vulnerability than any direct confession. People are attuned to the minute ways in which you negotiate your presence, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. The invisible architecture of micro-permissions becomes a map of your perceived weaknesses, guiding the social interactions around you. Even the well-intentioned attempts to maintain harmony can backfire. Attempting to prevent conflict or to reassure others often amplifies the perception of susceptibility. In striving to appear agreeable, you signal that your boundaries are negotiable, that your discomfort can be endured, and that your influence can be overridden without consequence. This creates an environment in which disrespect is not only allowed but expected. People respond to incentives, and if the social incentive is that your tolerance is limitless, they will naturally act to maximize their advantage. Your attempts to be civil and accommodating, while morally admirable, often function as invitations to test limits and probe for compliance. Disrespect emerges not from malice but from opportunity, and opportunity is created silently, invisibly, in the spaces between words and gestures. The danger lies in the unconscious nature of this exchange. Most individuals are unaware of the signals they send, of the micro-permissions they extend, and of the patterns they reinforce. Each smile at a degrading comment, each avoidance of confrontation, and each unnecessary explanation contributes to an internal ledger that observers use to calculate leverage. The human mind instinctively reads these signals, even when the conscious mind does not, forming conclusions about dominance and submission long before any overt act of disrespect occurs. Once these conclusions are established, behavior adjusts to exploit the perceived vulnerability, and the cycle of disregard is perpetuated. Respect, in this context, is a reflection not of moral worth but of the invisible architecture of psychological cost, a cost that is determined by the signals you allow others to perceive. Niceness is often misunderstood as virtue, yet in the shadowed corridors of human interaction, it is frequently a liability. The world does not reward moral intent. It responds to the perception of strength, stability, and consequence. Those who are constantly kind, patient, or forgiving may believe they are building respect. But in reality, they are often constructing an invisible power for others to step over them. Niceness, when untethered from boundaries and authority, becomes a signal of pliability. It communicates that the individual is accessible, predictable, and unconcerned with the cost others extract from them. The very acts that are socially celebrated, smiling to soothe tension, agreeing to avoid conflict, overextending help, can paradoxically erode one's social standing. The mind of others interprets these behaviors not as benevolence, but as weakness, an opportunity to assert dominance without fear of reprisal. The problem lies in the assumption that goodness naturally commands deference. Moral niceness does not create psychological weight. It is often weightless in the eyes of others because it carries no implied consequence. While people admire altruism, admiration does not compel respect. Respect is granted to those whose presence is costly to undermine, whose absence would create discomfort or uncertainty, and whose limits are implicitly understood and enforced. The kind person, who endlessly accommodates the needs and emotions of others, rarely generates this type of psychological cost. Instead, their predictability and willingness to tolerate inconvenience create an environment in which others are free to exploit, manipulate, or disregard them. The more accommodating the individual, the easier it becomes for others to recalibrate their perception of authority downward. There is a subtle cruelty embedded in social dynamics. Those who refuse to impose discomfort often become the objects of emotional convenience. Others unconsciously internalize that the kind individual will endure transgressions, absorb slights, and maintain composure under pressure. This endurance, while morally admirable, functions as an invitation for exploitation. People do not respect what they can control effortlessly. Those who demonstrate a capacity to bear insult without retaliation inadvertently teach others that their tolerance is limitless, and what is limitless is often devalued. Niceness is respected only when paired with the ability to punish or withdraw, when it is clear that generosity has conditions, that kindness is not synonymous with endless availability. Without these boundaries, goodness becomes a vulnerability. Furthermore, the contemporary social emphasis on empathy and harmony has created a peculiar paradox. Individuals are rewarded socially for suppressing conflict, for prioritizing the feelings of others, and for avoiding the assertion of self-interest. While these behaviors may enhance group cohesion in superficial ways, they simultaneously erode personal authority. The world instinctively measures the psychological cost of transgressing against someone, and those who constantly accommodate present negligible cost. Over time, the social ledger tilts against them. People begin to take liberties, to push limits, and to treat them as instruments of convenience rather than equals deserving of regard. Niceness also clouds self-perception, making it difficult to recognize when one has ceded influence. The kind individual may misinterpret compliance, attention, or gratitude as genuine respect, failing to see that these responses often coexist with underlying exploitation. People may smile, nod, or praise, yet simultaneously erode authority behind the scenes. The very traits intended to elevate moral standing become, without subtle enforcement of boundaries, mechanisms that reduce psychological weight. It is a quiet form of attrition. Each act of unguarded kindness chips away at the perception of self-possession until the individual becomes a fixture of social manipulation rather than an agent of influence. The danger of moral niceness is further compounded by the natural human drive to exploit predictability. When someone's behavior is consistently generous, forgiving, and unassertive, others learn to anticipate compliance. They internalize patterns of response, calculating what can be taken without consequence. Niceness, in the absence of selective firmness or implicit threat, becomes a roadmap for manipulation. The kind individual, unaware of these unconscious dynamics, continues to operate on the assumption that virtue itself will shield them from disrespect. This belief is a fallacy, for the social world measures consequence, not intention. People respond to costs, not ethics, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. The paradox of niceness lies in its invisibility as a force. While overt aggression signals a clear social position, silent endurance of transgression signals the opposite. The absence of retaliation, the suppression of discomfort, and the overextension of tolerance all function as unspoken admissions. Boundaries are negotiable, limits are flexible, and authority is weak. In this landscape, kindness without strategy is not strength, it is a liability. The world does not reward goodness in isolation. It rewards the appearance of self-possession, the capacity to impose cost, and the ability to allow virtue to coexist with an unspoken readiness to enforce consequences. Power is a subtle force, often invisible to those who fail to perceive its quiet operations. It does not announce itself with grand gestures or proclamations. It moves silently, weaving through social structures and human interactions with the inevitability of a shadow. The psychology of feared respect relies not on overt intimidation, but on the perception that crossing a boundary carries consequence. Those who are truly respected do not need to prove themselves constantly, nor do they seek validation from others. Their authority is felt in the spaces between words, in the silence they maintain, in the selective nature of their presence. Every act of attention they grant, every interaction they allow, is weighed and deliberate, creating a psychological imbalance in which others are subtly reminded of their limitations. It is not power that commands loudly. It is the absence of need that unsettles, the demonstration that influence is not given lightly but earned through observation and calculation. Those who chase approval, who fill silence with words, or who react predictably, surrender this invisible dominance. The world instinctively measures reliability and cost. When a person's reactions are immediate and predictable, they become negotiable. Others learn the extent to which they can push, probe, or manipulate, and they adjust behavior to exploit perceived pliancy. Silence, on the other hand, functions as a signal of internal autonomy. By withholding immediate responses, by allowing space for uncertainty, one imposes a subtle cost on the observer. The mind must consider consequence, measure uncertainty, and adjust its own behavior in response. In these brief pauses and withheld actions, respect is silently enforced without the need for aggression or confrontation. Power thrives in this ambiguity, where potential cost exists but is not explicitly demonstrated, leaving others unsure of their ability to dominate. Fear plays a complex role in this dynamic. It is not fear in the traditional sense of terror, but an instinctive caution born of uncertainty. When someone demonstrates composure under pressure, when they reveal that their presence carries implications, others instinctively hesitate. They sense that their usual methods of influence may fail, that their attempt to assert dominance may provoke unforeseen consequences. This psychological caution creates an environment in which respect emerges naturally, not as an obligation, but as a survival strategy. People defer not out of admiration for virtue, but because the cost of misjudgment has become apparent. In this way, feared respect functions as a mechanism of social equilibrium, a silent recalibration of power relationships in which boundaries are acknowledged without the need for explicit confrontation. The practice of selective engagement is central to this principle. Those who are feared in the sense of respected rarely overextend themselves. They choose when and to whom to grant attention, creating scarcity that amplifies their psychological weight. By being intermittently absent, by controlling the availability of their presence, they cultivate an aura of significance. Others are forced to work harder to earn their attention, to consider the consequences of overstepping, and to recognize that the individual operates on principles not easily swayed by whim or social pressure. This scarcity transforms interactions into a delicate negotiation, where respect is not demanded, but inferred from the perceived cost of disregard. Authority is further reinforced through boundary enforcement. Those who are respected maintain limits consistently, not sporadically. Every violation that is ignored erodes perception of strength. Every concession made without cost invites further exploitation. The psychology of feared respect hinges upon the observer understanding that limits are fixed, that transgression is met with consequence, and that manipulation carries implicit risk. Consistency in these silent demonstrations of self-possession amplifies influence, as others are constantly reminded of the potential cost of crossing boundaries. Power is ultimately measured in perception. It is less about what is done and more about what is sensed. People adjust behavior based on the signals received, and those who are respected manipulate these signals carefully. Silence, measured engagement, and unyielding boundary combine to create an invisible authority that cannot be challenged easily. Feared respect is therefore not a product of aggression, intimidation, or cruelty, but of a psychological architecture of perceived consequence. It is a subtle understanding that influence exists even in stillness, that absence carries weight, and that human behavior is more constrained by perceived cost than by moral principle. Presence itself becomes a weapon. The individual who wields this psychological power does not need to dominate overtly. Their mere existence, controlled and deliberate, imposes uncertainty. Others are forced to navigate interactions cautiously, constantly reassessing what they can demand, how far they can push, and whether their usual strategies of influence will succeed. In this environment, respect arises spontaneously, rooted not in compliance or admiration, but in the silent recognition of potential consequence, in the understanding that transgression carries a price, and in the awareness that true power often remains unseen until it is too late to ignore.